There's a kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. It's the quiet ache that lives in people who see too deeply, who feel too much, who notice what others overlook. The world calls them distant, detached, mysterious, but they're not. They're just awake in a world that rarely slows down long enough to meet them. These are the old souls, the ones who carry a depth that doesn't fit into small talk, who crave silence in a society addicted to noise, who search for truth while others chase distraction. Their calm is often mistaken for coldness, their solitude for sadness. But behind that stillness lies a heart that feels everything, every joy, every sorrow, every unspoken thing moving beneath the surface of life. They don't pull away because they don't care. They pull away because they care too much to live half-heartedly. This story is about them, the quiet ones who walk through the world unseen, carrying the wisdom of lifetimes in their eyes. It's about the hidden loneliness that comes from depth and the beauty that waits on the other side of it. The peace that only arrives when an old soul finally learns to stop hiding and simply be. They're easy to miss, the quiet ones, the ones who move through life softly, speaking gently, observing more than they explain. They're not shy, not withdrawn out of fear. It's something else, something older, like they've seen too much of the world to waste words on what doesn't matter. There's a certain stillness in them, a depth that feels out of place in a world obsessed with noise. People mistake their silence for indifference, but it isn't that. It's awareness, the kind that sees through masks, through performances, through everything people use to hide. You can find them in crowds, but they don't quite belong there. While others rush to fill the air with words, they listen. They hear what isn't being said, the tremble in someone's tone, the sadness behind a smile, the unspoken weight in a room. They notice the small things others overlook, the way someone's eyes dim when they lie, the way energy shifts when truth enters the conversation. It's not a skill they chose to have. It's just how they are tuned in to the frequencies most people tune out. For them, life has always felt a little heavier. Not in a depressing way, but in a real way. They feel the world in high definition, the beauty, the pain, the contradictions. Where others see surface, they see layers. Where others chase distraction, they sense meaning. It sounds poetic, but it's not always easy. Depth can be lonely. When you see so much, it's hard to play along with things that feel shallow. It's hard to pretend small talk is enough when your soul craves something vast and true. The quiet ones often get misunderstood. People think they're distant, uninterested, or detached, but really, they're just processing. They don't speak to be heard. They speak when it matters. And in a world that confuses volume with value, their silence can make others uncomfortable. Yet beneath that quiet exterior lives an ocean of thought, empathy, and perception. They see patterns in people. They notice when someone's words and energy don't match. They sense tension before it's spoken. It's not magic, it's sensitivity, sharpened by years of watching and feeling. But the gift comes with a cost. When you feel everything, it's easy to absorb too much. When you understand too deeply, it's easy to stand apart. So the quiet ones learn to hold space without losing themselves in it. They learn to speak gently but live truthfully. Their calm isn't emptiness, it's protection. Their stillness isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The world may never fully understand them, but they don't need it to. They've made peace with being different. Because deep down, they know something most people don't. that silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of meaning. And in that quiet, they see more than words could ever say. Some people enter the world already tired, not the kind of tired that sleep can fix, but the kind that lives in the bones, an ancient weariness, quiet and deep. Even as children, they seem older than their years. They look at life with eyes that have already seen too much, even if they can't explain why. While other kids play without a care, the old soul watches, wondering about things no one else seems to notice. It's not sadness, exactly. It's more like remembering, remembering something they can't quite put into words. They laugh, they learn, they live like everyone else, but there's always a part of them standing slightly apart, observing the world instead of being fully lost in it. They ask questions that make adults pause. They sense emotions before they're spoken. They feel the ache behind other people's smiles and the truth buried under their words. It's as if they were born halfway between worlds, one foot here, the other somewhere else, carrying wisdom that doesn't belong to their age. From the start, they feel the weight of existence, the noise of life, the endless chase for things that don't matter. It exhausts them. They don't understand how others can stay so easily entertained by small things, so untouched by the deeper currents running underneath everything. They try to join in, to fit into the rhythm of the world, but their heart beats to a slower, older tempo. It's not that they don't care, it's that they care too much. Every injustice, every loss, every moment of beauty hits them harder. They carry emotions like echoes that don't fade. And so they learn early how to mask their depth. They smile when they're expected to. They hide their questions when people say they're too deep. But inside, they feel something ancient, stirring a knowing that life is temporary, fragile, precious. They've felt that truth since before they had the words to describe it. Maybe that's why they've always been gentle with people, careful with feelings, protective of hearts, because some part of them remembers how easily everything breaks. This kind of soul gets tired because they live deeply in a shallow world. They sense meaning where others see routine. They look for truth in places most people overlook. And while that gives them wisdom, it also makes them ache. Sometimes they long for ignorance, for the simplicity of not knowing, not feeling, not seeing so much. But even that longing feels ancient, like it's been carried through lifetimes. As they grow, the old soul begins to understand that their tiredness isn't weakness. It's the body's way of holding centuries of experience, the heart's way of remembering what matters. It's the fatigue of empathy, of awareness, of living life awake. And yet, beneath that weariness, there's something unbreakable, a quiet flame that refuses to go out. Because even though they've seen and felt so much, the old soul knows that every lifetime, every ache, every breath is another chance to remember why they came here at all, to turn their ancient tiredness into timeless understanding. There's a kind of heaviness that doesn't come from sorrow, but from seeing too clearly. The old soul carries it quietly, the weight of knowing. It's what happens when awareness stretches beyond what most people are ready to see. They notice patterns, feel meanings, sense truths that others brush past. The more they understand, the harder it becomes to take life lightly. What others call just how it is feels to them like a mystery asking to be solved, a sadness asking to be understood. And sometimes that understanding is more burden than gift. They see the way people hurt each other out of fear. They see how many live half awake, numbing themselves with distraction, mistaking noise for life. They see the systems built on illusion, the chase for validation, the obsession with image, the quiet desperation hiding beneath everyone's smile. And while others seem fine floating on the surface, the old soul can't help but dive deeper. They can't unsee what they've seen. Awareness has no off switch. It's not cynicism that makes them quiet. It's empathy mixed with exhaustion. They feel everything, the hope and the heartbreak, the light and the shadow, all at once. They carry the contradictions of life in their chest, beauty and suffering, joy and fragility, the constant rise and fall of everything. When you understand that every smile might hide pain, that every beginning carries an ending, it changes how you move through the world. You stop pretending it's simple. You stop expecting people to be perfect. But you also stop being able to laugh at things that once seemed funny, to enjoy things without feeling their edges. That's the curse of awareness. It deepens everything. Even happiness becomes layered with an ache because you know how temporary it is. Even love feels sacred and sad at the same time because you understand how fragile it can be. You learn to hold both the joy and the pain without running from either. It's not easy, but it's real. People sometimes mistake this heaviness for coldness. They think the old soul is detached, when in truth, they're just carrying too much truth at once. They're not bored, they're burdened. They wish they could stop analyzing, stop seeing all the invisible threads connecting everything. But knowledge, once awakened, can't go back to sleep. So they learn to live with it. They learn to balance the weight by turning it into wisdom. They start to realize that maybe awareness isn't meant to make life easier. It's meant to make it meaningful. They learn to see depth, not as punishment, but as purpose. Over time, the heaviness becomes softer. It doesn't crush them anymore. It grounds them. The knowing that once felt like a weight becomes something steadier, understanding. They stop wishing for ignorance and start learning how to hold awareness gently, like light in their hands. Because the truth is, yes, awareness is heavy, but it's also the only thing that makes life real. At some point, the old soul learns that being deep makes people uncomfortable. Not because depth is bad, but because most of the world lives on the surface. As a child, they spoke honestly, asked big questions, noticed what others ignored. They wondered why people pretended to be fine when they clearly weren't. Why adults said things they didn't mean. Why truth was treated like something too heavy to talk about. But the more they spoke, the more the world looked back with confusion or silence. Eventually they learned. To fit in, they'd have to wear a mask. It starts small. A fake laugh here. A polite, "I'm fine" there. They practice the language of small talk, even though it feels like speaking in another tongue. They nod when others gossip, smile when they're expected to, and hide the thoughts that would make them sound too serious. Over time, it becomes second nature, this quiet performance of normality. On the outside, they seem calm, agreeable, maybe even ordinary. But inside, their mind is elsewhere, thinking, feeling, analyzing, drifting through places most people never visit. It's a lonely kind of acting, because while everyone else seems comfortable in the shallow end, they're always looking toward the depths, pretending not to. They listen to conversations about things that don't matter and wonder why no one else is asking the questions that keep them awake at night. They crave meaning the way others crave attention. But when they try to speak from that place, they're told they're overthinking, too intense, too sensitive. So they shrink. They hide their wonder behind jokes, their insight behind silence. The misfit's mask isn't worn out of deceit, it's worn for survival. They learn to blend in because standing out feels like being exposed. They know that if they show too much of what's inside their curiosity, their compassion, their sense of knowing, they risk being misunderstood, dismissed, or laughed at. So they build a version of themselves that's easier to digest. Not false, just edited. A smaller, quieter version of who they really are. But the mask is heavy. It costs them energy, authenticity, and joy. It's hard to pretend to be fine when your mind is full of galaxies. It's hard to pretend you don't care when you feel everything so deeply. Over time, the old soul begins to resent the disguise. They start craving truth more than belonging. They realize that every time they hide their depth, they betray something sacred, their own essence. Eventually, they start taking the mask off, piece by piece, first in private, then around the few who can handle their honesty. They learn that not everyone will understand them, and that's okay. The right people won't need them to hide. And slowly, they discover that being real is worth more than being liked. Because the world might not always know what to do with their depth, but it's that same depth that makes them who they are. And even if they must walk alone for a while, at least they're walking as themselves. There comes a time when the old soul realizes the world isn't built for depth. Everywhere they turn, there's noise, endless scrolling, endless opinions, endless distractions dressed up as meaning. People rush to speak before they think, to post before they feel, to prove before they understand. It's a strange kind of emptiness, loud and glittering. And for the one who feels deeply, it becomes almost unbearable. They start to drift through life like a ghost, present but unseen, surrounded but untouched, watching a world that never seems to slow down long enough to breathe. They try to join in, at first. They smile at the small talk, play along with the games, laugh at things that don't really make them laugh. But every time they do, something inside them feels a little less alive. They can sense the hollowness beneath the noise, the loneliness hiding behind constant connection, the insecurity behind every perfect image, the desperation behind all the pretending. It's not judgment. It's empathy, sharpened by truth. They can see that everyone's searching for something real, but no one wants to sit in the stillness long enough to find it. The old soul feels the weight of that stillness. They crave it the way others crave attention. They long for silence, for conversation that doesn't end in cliches, for eye contact that doesn't flicker toward a screen. But in a world addicted to performance, their quiet becomes strange. People mistake their calm for detachment, their solitude for sadness. They don't see that it's the only way the old soul can survive the surface, by staying grounded in what's real. The disconnection grows. Parties feel hollow. Crowds feel suffocating. Even friendships start to feel shallow when built on constant distraction. The old soul watches people fill their emptiness with noise, music blasting, phones glowing, conversations looping around nothing. They see it everywhere. People desperate to avoid silence because silence reveals too much. And so they begin to step back, not out of arrogance, but necessity. It's not that they don't love the world, they do. They just love it differently. They see the beauty beneath the noise, the moment before dawn, the sound of rain, the way someone's eyes soften when they finally tell the truth. These small, quiet things are what feed their spirit. They live for authenticity, for connection that feels like peace instead of performance. But being that way can make them feel invisible, like they're speaking a language few remember. They move gently through a loud world, sensing they don't quite belong to it. Sometimes that feels lonely. Other times, it feels sacred, because even if the world doesn't see them, they see it clearly, painfully, beautifully. The surface world runs fast and burns bright, but the old soul has learned to walk slowly in its shadows. They know that what's real doesn't shout, it whispers. And though the world may never fully understand their quiet, they keep listening to the truth beneath the noise. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes with understanding people too well. The old soul can connect with anyone, the shy, the loud, the broken, the brilliant. They can slip into another person's world so easily, it almost feels like magic. They listen deeply, see clearly, and understand what others can't even say out loud. But that's the hidden ache, because while they can meet everyone else where they are, very few ever meet them where they are. It's like standing on a bridge that only goes one way. Conversations come easily, but rarely deeply. They nod, they smile, they help others untangle their pain, but afterward, they're left with a quiet emptiness. Everyone leaves lighter, but the old soul walks away heavier, carrying pieces of what they've absorbed. People call them wise, empathetic, so easy to talk to, but no one seems to ask what they need. They're seen as strong, grounded, self-contained, and in some ways, they are. But even strong souls crave to be seen beyond their calm, to be understood without having to translate themselves. It's not arrogance that makes them feel separate, it's awareness. They notice subtleties most overlook, contradictions people don't even realize they're living. They can sense when someone is lying to themselves, when a smile hides exhaustion, when a friendship is built on convenience instead of truth. And once you see that much, it's hard to unsee it. It's hard to relax into relationships that live only on the surface. They try, of course. They try to dim their insight, to laugh more, to play along. But the conversations that feel easy for others feel empty for them. The small talk, the gossip, the endless repetition of the same shallow stories, it all feels like static noise. What they long for is depth, the kind of dialogue that stretches into silence, the kind of connection that feels timeless. But in a world rushing toward distraction, depth can be a lonely place to stand. Sometimes, when they meet another person with that same quiet awareness, there's an instant recognition like two old souls remembering each other. The conversation flows, the silence feels safe, and suddenly, the loneliness softens. But those moments are rare, fleeting, sacred. Most of the time, they walk alone, not because they want to, but because they'd rather be alone than half present. The loneliness of understanding isn't about being unloved. It's about being unseen. People love the light the old soul gives, but they rarely look into the darkness that shapes it. They appreciate the calm without realizing the storms it took to find it. And so, the old soul keeps their depth quiet not as a secret, but as protection. It's a quiet ache, yes, but it's also a kind of freedom, because in their solitude, they begin to understand something beautiful that maybe they were never meant to be fully understood by the world. Maybe their task is simply to understand it, to hold space for the chaos, to love from afar, to see deeply without needing to be seen. There comes a point when connection starts to feel strange, not because the old soul has forgotten how to care, but because the way people connect in the modern world doesn't feel like connection anymore. It's fast, shallow, full of words that sound close but mean nothing, messages sent without presence, conversations that skim the surface but never touch the heart. The old soul can play along, nod, reply, smile, but something inside them stays untouched. It's not that they don't want closeness. It's that they can no longer pretend that surface talk feels like it. Ordinary conversations start to sound like echoes. How are you? Fine. What's new? Not much. Everything's busy, everyone's tired, no one's really there. The words flow, but there's no pulse in them. The old soul listens politely, waiting for something real to appear between the lines. A question that matters, a thought that stirs something, a glimpse of honesty. But most of the time, it never comes. So they retreat, not out of pride, but preservation. Their energy feels too sacred to spend on empty noise. They crave meaning like oxygen. They long for the kind of talk that feels alive, conversations that wander through the dark, touch truth, and leave both people changed. They want to sit in the quiet, with someone who doesn't rush to fill it, to talk about why we dream, why we hurt, what we're really doing here. But meaning has become rare, and in its absence, the old soul starts to feel foreign in their own world. People sometimes call them distant, but they're not. They just can't fake enthusiasm for what doesn't feed the soul. They can't force themselves to care about gossip, trends, or trivial arguments that go nowhere. It's not arrogance, it's alignment. They've tasted what real connection feels like, and nothing less will do. The old soul doesn't want many people. They just want real ones. It's not easy, though. There are days when the silence feels heavy, when they wish they could unlearn the craving for depth. Life would be simpler if they could be satisfied with the surface. But the truth is, once you've seen the beauty of genuine connection when two souls meet and everything false falls away, you can't go back. You can't forget how that feels. So they keep searching. They listen for the rare voices that speak from the heart, the ones who aren't afraid of silence, who don't confuse vulnerability with weakness. And when they find them, it feels like coming home. The conversation flows effortlessly, the pauses feel sacred, and time disappears. Until then, the old soul walks quietly through a noisy world, patient and steady, carrying an open heart like a lantern. They may not find meaning everywhere, but they refuse to stop seeking it. Because even if connection has become rare, they know one truth that keeps them going. What's rare is never gone. It's just waiting to be met by those who still remember how to feel. At some point, the old soul stops trying to explain themselves. They stop trying to make the world understand their silence, their stillness, their way of seeing things. Because every time they tried, it only made them feel further away. So instead of searching for understanding outside of themselves, they turn inward into the quiet. At first, it feels lonely. The silence stretches like an empty room. But slowly, it begins to change. The silence starts to speak. They begin to realize that silence isn't the absence of connection, it's the presence of truth. In quiet moments, they can hear their own thoughts clearly without the static of other people's opinions. They notice the rhythm of their breathing, the soft hum of their heartbeat, the simple miracle of being alive. The world moves fast. But in their stillness, time slows down. And in that space, something beautiful starts to happen. They begin to meet themselves. For so long, their focus had been outward, understanding others, helping, listening, absorbing. But now, the mirror turns inward, reflecting not faces or words, but essence. They start to notice who they are beneath all the empathy and analysis, the pure awareness that has always been there, quietly watching. The silence becomes a mirror that doesn't flatter or judge. It just shows the truth. At first, they resist it. Stillness can be uncomfortable when you've spent your life filling every gap with sound. The mind rebels, whispering, "You should be doing something." But they stay. And in that staying, something sacred unfolds. They begin to find comfort in their own presence, not needing noise, not needing validation, just being. The silence that once felt heavy now feels like a friend. They start taking walks without headphones, sitting in their room with the lights low, watching the world move without needing to move with it. People might call it isolation, but to them, it feels like peace. For the first time, they aren't performing or pretending. They're not mirroring anyone's expectations. They're simply existing, quietly, honestly. The mirror of silence reveals both the shadows and the light within them. It shows the pain they've carried, the fatigue of understanding too much, the gentle strength that's kept them going. It also shows the beauty, the compassion that never died, the wisdom that grew from solitude, the quiet courage to keep feeling in a world that fears feeling. They begin to see that being understood by others was never the real goal. The real task was learning to understand themselves. And in that self-understanding, the loneliness starts to fade. The silence isn't empty anymore, it's full. Full of presence, full of truth, full of life. The old soul no longer needs the world to echo them back. The mirror they were searching for was always within. And now, when they sit in the stillness, they don't feel unseen. They feel whole. It's a strange feeling to be called distant when all you've ever been is deep. The old soul learns this early. Their quietness, their calm, their way of observing instead of reacting, it unsettles people who are used to constant noise. To others, it looks like detachment, like they don't care enough, feel enough, try enough. But inside, there's an ocean. Their calm isn't emptiness, it's control. It's awareness. It's choosing not to spill everything just to prove it's there. The old soul feels things intensely, but they've learned not to show it all. They've seen how easily emotion gets misunderstood, how truth spoken too soon can close more doors than it opens. So they keep their feelings sacred, sharing them only with people who've earned their trust. It's not secrecy, it's self-respect. But the world, impatient and shallow, reads stillness as distance. People confuse thoughtfulness for coldness, reflection for indifference. They mistake the old soul's silence for not caring, when really, it's caring too deeply to waste words on noise. They watch others rush to fill every pause with sound, every moment of discomfort with chatter. But silence doesn't scare them, it centers them. In silence, they can see things clearly. They notice what people avoid saying, the emotions hiding behind the polite smiles. They understand that truth isn't loud, it's quiet. It waits to be noticed. And yet, that very understanding makes them stand apart. Because while others are drawn to excitement, drama, and speed, the old soul moves at the pace of presence, slower, softer, but infinitely deeper. It's not easy being misunderstood this way. They try to connect, but their calm makes others think they're bored. They try to help, but their quiet guidance is mistaken for disinterest. Sometimes, people walk away thinking the old soul didn't care enough to fight for them, when in truth, they cared too much to fight the wrong way. They've learned that not every battle needs noise, that love can be steady instead of loud, that peace isn't the absence of emotion, it's emotion refined into understanding. This misunderstanding often becomes their burden. They carry relationships that fell apart not from lack of love, but from lack of recognition. They hold conversations that never reached depth because others mistook their pauses for walls. It hurts, but they don't chase to prove themselves anymore. They've realized that those who need constant reassurance will never see the quiet ways they care, the listening, the patience, the steadiness that never wavers even when unacknowledged. Over time, they stop apologizing for their calm. They stop trying to explain their silence, because those who truly see them will understand that their stillness isn't withdrawal, it's wisdom. Their introspection isn't apathy, it's awareness. And their distance isn't lack of love, it's space for clarity. The old soul doesn't need to shout to be felt. Their presence speaks softly, but it lingers like a quiet warmth that remains long after the noise is gone. There's a particular kind of tiredness that settles into the bones of an empath, a weariness that sleep can't touch. It's not from doing too much, but from feeling too much. From constantly sensing the moods in a room before anyone speaks, from absorbing emotions that don't belong to them, from always being tuned in to everyone else's storms while quietly drowning in their own. The empath's fatigue isn't about weakness. It's the natural result of living in a world that feels louder and heavier to them than it does to most people. They walk through life like emotional antennas, picking up every signal, every vibration, every hidden sadness behind a smile. They can tell when someone's lying, not from the words, but from the subtle drop in their energy. They can sense when someone's pretending to be okay, even when they swear they're fine. And while this gift can make them extraordinary friends, listeners, and healers, it also makes them vulnerable, because they give and give, often without realizing how much it costs. They carry the weight of other people's pain like it's their own. But what makes it harder is that very few people ever sense them. The empath, so focused on others, is rarely met with the same depth. People come to them to be understood, but few stay long enough to understand in return. They're everyone's safe place, yet they have nowhere to rest. Their sensitivity, the thing that makes them so compassionate, also isolates them. Because how do you explain a kind of exhaustion that doesn't show on your face? How do you tell someone that even joy can feel heavy when it's always tangled with everyone else's energy? So they start to pull back, not dramatically, not with resentment, just slowly, quietly. They stop answering every message right away. They skip social gatherings that feel more draining than fun. They crave solitude, not because they hate people, but because it's the only place they can hear themselves think alone. They can finally breathe without absorbing someone else's emotions. This retreat can confuse others. People might say the empath has changed, that they've become distant or cold. But the truth is, they're not withdrawing from love, they're withdrawing from overload. They're learning what no one taught them. That sensitivity without boundaries becomes suffering. That empathy without self-care turns into self-erasure. Over time, they begin to understand that their depth isn't meant to be used up. It's meant to be shared wisely. They learn to listen without absorbing, to care without carrying. They learn that it's okay to be the one who needs space, silence, and rest. And in that stillness, the fatigue starts to fade. What returns in its place is something gentler: clarity. The realization that being deeply feeling isn't a curse. It's just energy that needs balance. The empath who once burned out from giving now glows softly from within, no longer drained, but restored, finally learning that the truest form of empathy begins with themselves. There comes a moment when the noise of the world becomes too much, when every voice, every demand, every tiny piece of chaos feels like it's pressing in from all sides. The old soul feels it more than most. They can't ignore it or tune it out. It seeps into their thoughts, their breath, their body. So they do the only thing that makes sense: they withdraw. Not out of bitterness or rejection, but out of quiet necessity. Solitude isn't an escape for them. It's medicine. At first, it looks like disappearance. They stop replying as quickly. They turn down invitations. They spend longer hours alone, lost in thought, in music, in silence. To others, it might seem like distance. But inside, something deeper is happening. They're returning to themselves. In solitude, their energy starts to settle. The emotions that don't belong to them begin to fall away. The constant noise of other people's expectations fades until only one voice remains their own. For a while, that voice is faint, almost unfamiliar. After years of living for others, their inner world feels quiet, but fragile, like an old house being slowly restored. They start small: a walk without their phone, an evening spent watching the sky fade into dusk, a morning without words. And in that simplicity, they feel something sacred reawakening: peace. Solitude becomes their sanctuary, not a prison, but a place of renewal. It's where they stop performing, where they don't have to translate their thoughts into something easier for others to understand, where they can breathe without filtering themselves through the lens of who they're supposed to be. In solitude, they remember what it feels like to exist without needing to please or protect anyone else. Of course, not everyone understands. Some call it isolation. Some say they're overthinking, withdrawing too much. But the old soul knows the truth. Solitude isn't loneliness. It's the art of returning home to your own energy. It's how they recharge after giving too much of themselves to a world that constantly takes. It's how they stay gentle without breaking, compassionate without collapsing. In the stillness, life starts to look different. The smallest things: sunlight on the floor, the sound of rain, the weight of their own breath, begin to feel miraculous again. They start to see that the depth they were always searching for in others was within them all along. They realize they don't have to run from silence anymore. Silence has been waiting for them, ready to heal what the noise has worn down. And when they finally return to the world, because they always do, they come back softer, steadier, more whole. Solitude didn't make them less connected. It made them capable of deeper connection. Because now they give from overflow, not from emptiness. The pull toward solitude was never about hiding. It was about remembering. Remembering that peace isn't found in the crowd. It's found in the quiet company of your own soul. There's a kind of sadness that doesn't feel like sadness. It's quieter, older, like a distant echo you can't trace the source of. The old soul knows it well. It's not depression, not emptiness. It's a longing that lives deep in the bones, like a memory of something once known but long forgotten. It shows up in moments of stillness, when the noise fades and the world slows down. It's there when you watch the sunset and feel both awe and ache, when a song moves you to tears and you don't know why, when you look up at the stars and feel, for a moment, both infinite and lost. That's the ancient ache, the homesickness of the soul. It's the feeling of remembering a connection that this world seems to have misplaced. A sense that once, life was more sacred, time was slower, people were more present. It's the ache of knowing how things could be, how humans were meant to live, how love was meant to feel, how truth was meant to sound, and realizing how far we've drifted from it. The old soul feels that distance like a physical weight. They can sense that something is missing, even when everything looks fine on the surface. They walk through a world full of technology, conversation, and motion, yet something in them whispers, "This isn't it." It's not a wish to escape the world, but a yearning to remember what it used to mean to be in it. The old soul misses depth in a time of speed, meaning in a time of noise, sincerity in a time of performance. They miss the connection between nature and spirit, between people and truth, between self and soul. Even if they can't name it, their body knows it, their heart knows it, that life was never supposed to feel this artificial, this disconnected, this loud. So they search. They wander through quiet places, drawn to forests, oceans, books, and silence, anything that feels closer to the real. They look for fragments of that lost wholeness wherever they can find them. And sometimes, in rare moments, in laughter that feels pure, in music that feels timeless, in the stillness of early morning, they feel it again. The ache softens, the longing quiets. For a moment, they remember what they've been missing. People might mistake it for melancholy, but it's not sadness, it's memory. The old soul isn't broken. They're remembering a way of being that humanity has forgotten. That's why they're drawn to the timeless, the sacred, the slow. That's why their hearts feel too big for a world obsessed with small things. The ancient ache never fully leaves them, but over time, they learn to live with it, even honor it. It becomes their compass, a reminder that they are here to bring back what was lost, to live deeply in a shallow time, to love sincerely in a world that performs it. The ache isn't their weakness. It's their proof that they still remember what it means to be whole. There's a quiet cost to seeing the world clearly, one that no one warns you about. The old soul learns this slowly, often through loneliness. When you start seeing through illusions, through masks, through the small performances that keep society comfortable, you begin to stand apart. Not because you want to, but because you can't help it. Once your eyes open to truth, you can't close them again. You can't pretend not to see. And the more you see, the harder it becomes to belong. At first, you try. You laugh at the jokes that don't really feel funny. You join in the conversations that circle around nothing real. You tell yourself to relax, to not think so much. But the illusion keeps breaking. You notice how people lie to themselves just to keep going. How much of life is built on pretending, pretending to be happy, pretending to be certain, pretending to know what they're doing. You see how much of the world's confidence is just fear in disguise. Once you notice it, you can't unsee it. And suddenly, what used to feel normal starts to feel hollow. Clarity can be a gift, but it's also a kind of exile. Because most people aren't ready to look at life that deeply. They don't want mirrors held up to their illusions. They want comfort. And when you stop playing along, when you stop feeding the lies, even gently they sense it. They pull away. You become different, distant, hard to read. But what they don't understand is that your distance isn't rejection, it's protection. You're not looking down on anyone. You're just tired of living half asleep. The more clearly you see, the quieter you become. Not out of arrogance, but out of compassion. You learn that truth isn't meant to be forced on people. Everyone wakes up when they're ready. So instead of trying to convince others, you carry your clarity softly. You let people have their dreams, their illusions, their pace. You stop needing to be understood because you've learned that most people only understand what matches their level of awareness. But even in that acceptance, the isolation lingers. It's strange to live in a world where so few want to look beneath the surface. Sometimes it feels like you're walking through a play, watching actors who don't know they're acting. You care for them, but you can't step back into the script. You've already seen the stage lights. Yet, with time, the loneliness transforms. You realize that standing apart doesn't mean being alone. It means you've chosen authenticity over illusion. And though that choice costs you the comfort of belonging, it gives you something rarer, peace. You stop needing the world to understand you. You start seeking others who see too, even if they're few. Because in the end, perception is both the price and the prize. To see clearly is to lose the crowd, but find the truth. And once you've seen the truth, even in its loneliness, you wouldn't trade it for blindness again. There comes a point when words stop working, not because there's nothing to say, but because what the old soul feels runs deeper than language can reach. How do you explain the ache of beauty that hurts? The peace that comes with sadness? The love that exists even after goodbye? Words stumble over feelings like that. They make something infinite sound small. So the old soul begins to speak less. Not out of withdrawal, but out of respect. Because silence often says what language can't. They used to try to explain their thoughts, their visions, their sense of things unseen. But every attempt left them feeling misunderstood. Words flattened their meaning, made it sound simpler, weaker, more ordinary than it was. People nodded politely, half listening, eager to respond, and the old soul realized that language wasn't always communication. Sometimes it was just noise words colliding without understanding. So they stopped forcing it. They let silence do what speech couldn't. In the quiet, they found a different kind of listening, the kind that goes beyond sound. They began to notice the tone behind people's words, the pauses between them, the emotions hidden inside them. They realized that truth isn't always spoken. Sometimes it hums softly in the spaces between. They learned to read eyes, to hear energy, to sense meaning without needing sentences. It became their second language, one that most of the world had forgotten how to speak. When they do talk, their words carry weight. They don't speak to fill silence. They speak to honor it. Every sentence feels intentional, shaped by care. They'd rather say nothing than say something false. To some, this makes them mysterious. To others, intimidating. But to those who really listen, Their presence says more than any speech could. There's a strange freedom in not needing to explain everything. The old soul learns to rest in the mystery of what can't be described. They no longer chase perfect words for imperfect truths. Instead, they start feeling them fully, letting emotions wash through without the need to name them. The moon doesn't explain its light. It just glows. And so do they. But silence isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it hurts, the kind of hurt that comes from not being able to share what's inside you. There are nights when they wish someone could just feel their thoughts instead of hearing them. When they wish connection didn't depend on conversation. When they wish someone else understood that silence, for them, isn't emptiness, it's depth. Still, over time, they come to cherish it, because in the stillness they feel closer to truth. The world rushes to talk, to define, to prove. The old soul sits quietly, knowing that what's real doesn't need to shout, it just is. And maybe that's the greatest wisdom they've found, that sometimes the most powerful language isn't words at all. It's presence, it's awareness, it's the quiet understanding that doesn't need to be spoken to be known. Night has always felt different to the old soul. When the world finally quiets and the constant noise fades into the distance, something inside them begins to breathe again. The moon rises like an ancient friend, soft and patient, lighting up the darkness with a kind of gentle honesty. Under its glow, the old soul feels more alive than they do during the day. Not because something changes around them, but because something changes within them. The distractions fall away, the pretending stops, and what's left is truth, raw, still, beautiful. They walk outside, or sometimes just sit by a window, watching the moonlight spill across the world. Everything looks softer at night. The edges blur. The sharpness of the day disappears. The old soul feels the same thing happening inside themselves. The harsh thoughts, the weight of overthinking, the noise of other people's emotions, it all loosens its grip. What remains is a deep, almost sacred stillness. For the first time all day, they don't feel like they're standing apart from life. They are life breathing with it, pulsing with it, connected to something far greater than words could ever describe. The moon becomes their mirror. It reflects their inner light, steady, quiet, and often unseen by the world. During the day, they move through life like shadows, misunderstood for their calm, mistaken for distant. But under the moon, they feel understood without needing to explain. Its glow doesn't demand. It doesn't judge. It simply is. And that's all the old soul has ever wanted, to exist without needing to perform. The loneliness they feel during the day softens at night. In the dark, they don't feel alone, they feel infinite. The silence doesn't isolate them. It welcomes them. They can feel the hum of the earth, the whisper of the wind, the subtle rhythm of everything alive. They realize that connection doesn't always mean people. It can mean presence with the sky, the stars, the air itself. There's a peace in that kind of connection, one that doesn't ask for anything in return. Sometimes they think maybe the moon understands what it's like to be them, to glow quietly while the world sleeps, to shine without needing applause, to hold light and darkness at the same time. The moon doesn't try to outshine the sun or fight for attention. It knows its purpose: to illuminate quietly, to guide gently, to remind the world that even darkness can be beautiful when held with light. The old soul carries that lesson. They stop trying to be seen and start learning to simply be. The moon becomes their teacher, showing them that presence can be powerful, that silence can be alive, that stillness can hold the entire sky. And when they look up at it, glowing softly, endlessly patient, they realize something simple but profound. They were never truly alone. They were always connected, just not in the way the world understands. There comes a time when the old soul quietly stops searching for where they belong. After years of trying to fit into places that never felt right, of bending themselves to match the rhythm of others, they finally grow tired. Not the kind of tired that rest can fix, but the kind that comes from living out of alignment. They stop forcing connection, stop explaining themselves to people who only hear in echoes, stop pretending that belonging means being understood by everyone. Instead, they begin to withdraw not from life, but from the noise that keeps them from truly living it. It's not a dramatic disappearance. There's no announcement, no bitterness, no goodbye, just a gentle turning inward. The group chats go unanswered, the parties feel too loud, and the conversations that once held meaning start to feel like sand slipping through their fingers. For the first time, the old soul doesn't fight the quiet. They start to crave it, the stillness of their own company, the peace of not needing to perform, the calm that comes when they stop searching for permission to be themselves. At first, the withdrawal feels strange. Society teaches us that being alone means being lonely. But solitude begins to show them something different, a kind of sacred peace that only appears when the world fades into the background. In that space, they remember who they were before they started trying to belong everywhere. They realize they've spent so much time trying to be seen that they forgot what it felt like to see themselves. Slowly, solitude turns from something uncomfortable into something necessary. It's no longer a punishment, it's a homecoming. In that quiet, they reconnect with their own thoughts, their own energy, their own rhythm. They start creating without needing an audience, reflecting without needing validation, resting without guilt. The more time they spend in alignment with themselves, the more they realize how much of their old life was built on trying to be accepted by people who never really saw them. The old soul learns that belonging isn't something the world gives you, it's something you return to inside yourself. The more they stop chasing connection, the more authentic connection finds them. Because energy doesn't lie. When you live in truth, you attract truth. The relationships that remain are softer, simpler, built on ease instead of effort. The ones that fade were never meant to last, beyond illusion. And so, the soul withdraws, not to escape, but to realign. They begin to understand that solitude isn't loneliness when it feels like peace. It's where the noise ends and clarity begins. It's where pretending dies and authenticity is reborn. The old soul no longer looks for belonging in others because they've found something deeper, belonging within themselves. And once that happens, they stop fearing solitude altogether. Because now, even when they walk alone, they never truly feel alone. They walk with their own soul, and that, they finally realize, was the connection they were searching for all along. Sometimes, the old soul feels a sadness they can't explain, a strange nostalgia for something they've never lived. It's not tied to a memory, not to a place or a person. It's deeper, older, like a whisper from somewhere beyond this lifetime. They might be walking through a forest and suddenly feel like they've been there before, even though they haven't. Or hear a song that makes them cry without knowing why. It's as if echoes of other lives, other lessons, linger inside them, stirring just beneath the surface. The old soul carries the shadows of the past, not as clear memories, but as emotional imprints, ancient wisdom disguised as weariness. It's a timeless fatigue, a sense that they've seen this all before. The patterns of human behavior, the rise and fall of love and loss, the endless cycle of misunderstanding and rediscovery, it all feels familiar. They watch people make the same mistakes over and over, chasing happiness in the same hollow places, and they can't help but feel a quiet déjà vu. It's not judgment, it's recognition. It's the exhaustion of someone who has lived these lessons too many times to count. Sometimes this awareness becomes heavy. They can feel like an old traveler trapped in a young body, wise beyond their years, but tired in ways they can't describe. They might feel an unexplainable compassion for strangers, an instant understanding of pain that isn't theirs. It's as if their soul remembers what it means to break and heal, again and again, across time. And while that sensitivity gives them depth, it also isolates them. Because how do you explain that your sadness isn't from this life, but from the memory of countless others? They often find themselves drawn to the past, to history, to mythology, to music and art that carry the weight of time. These things feel like home, like fragments of something they've lost and are always trying to find again. They might be fascinated by a certain culture or time period without knowing why. It's not curiosity, it's remembrance. Their soul recognizes the energy, the stories, the lessons that once shaped them. But the shadows of the past aren't just memories, they're teachers. Each ache, each echo, carries a message. The old soul begins to realize that they are not cursed by this depth. They are entrusted with it. The fatigue isn't meant to break them, but to guide them toward understanding. It's a reminder that they've walked this path before, and this time they can walk it wiser. And slowly they make peace with it. The shadows don't fade, but they soften. They stop trying to explain their ancient sadness or make it disappear. Instead, they honor it as proof that their soul has endured, evolved, and continued. They begin to see that reincarnated wisdom isn't a burden at all. It's a quiet strength, earned through lifetimes of learning what love, loss, and truth really mean. And in that acceptance, the old soul finally rests not because they've forgotten, but because they've remembered enough. The old soul's heart has always been a mystery to others. People often mistake their calm for indifference, their silence for apathy, their distance for disinterest. But the truth is, their heart feels too deeply to play the shallow games that most call connection. They don't wear their emotions loudly, not because they don't feel them, but because they feel everything. Every vibration in the room, every flicker of tension behind a smile, every word that doesn't match its energy. Their compassion runs so deep that it sometimes hurts to express it. So they hold it quietly, letting it live beneath the surface where it's safer. They've learned the hard way that not everyone understands depth. When they love without pretending. When they listen, they absorb. When they care, it's never halfway. But in a world that rewards performance over presence, this kind of sincerity can look strange. People expect emotion to be visible, loud, dramatic, obvious. The old soul's quiet devotion doesn't fit that mold. So others assume they don't care enough. They couldn't be more wrong. The old soul cares too much. That's why they pull back. That's why they take their time. They know what happens when they give their energy to those who only take. They know how easily empathy becomes exhaustion, how quickly love without balance turns into loss. So they protect their heart not by closing it, but by being intentional with it. They don't chase attention because they crave something deeper, connection that feels real. They'd rather sit in silence with someone who sees them than talk for hours with someone who doesn't. Still, this depth often makes them feel out of place. They move through friendships and relationships like a visitor from another emotional world. They see what others don't, feel what others ignore. It can be lonely, carrying that much sensitivity in a world that confuses numbness with strength. Sometimes they wish they could care less, blend in more, stop feeling so much, but they can't. It's not a choice, it's their nature. Their empathy is both their gift and their burden. People who misunderstand them often call them detached, when in truth, they're just discerning. They've learned to save their energy for what matters, to give their heart only to those who can hold it gently. They've been burned before by people who saw their compassion as something to take advantage of, not something to treasure. Now they love differently, not less, but wiser. And while others chase constant connection, the old soul moves slower, loving in quiet, steady ways. A thoughtful message, a silent presence in someone's pain. A look that says more than words ever could. Their love is subtle, but it's real. The kind that doesn't fade when things get difficult. The misunderstood heart doesn't need to prove its depth anymore. It has learned that being misunderstood is part of its path, because only a few will ever see the truth that their distance isn't coldness, it's care. A love so deep it refuses to be wasted on anything less than real. There comes a point when the old soul starts to wonder if love, the kind that feels true, even exists anymore. Not the surface kind that flickers and fades with convenience, not the performance people post online, but the kind that feels like coming home to someone's soul. They've seen so many versions of love that weren't real, dressed up as something deep but hollow underneath. So they stop searching for perfect, because perfect isn't what they want. They just want something honest, and that, in this world, feels like the rarest thing of all. They've learned that real love isn't made of grand gestures or constant excitement. It's quiet, grounded, patient. It's the way someone listens when you speak from your heart, the way they stay when things aren't easy. It's the peace that comes from being seen without needing to perform. But that kind of love doesn't come often. And so, the old soul waits not out of pride, but out of truth. They've seen what happens when they settle for less. They've felt the emptiness of giving their heart to someone who only wants the idea of love, not the work of it. People often tell them their standards are too high, but the old soul knows it's not about standards. It's about resonance. They don't want perfection. They want presence. Someone whose energy feels calm instead of chaotic. Someone who understands that love isn't control, it's connection. Someone who can sit in silence without feeling the need to fill it. They crave a kind of love that feels like safety, not performance. A love that doesn't ask them to shrink, to be understood. Until they find that, they'd rather be alone. That's what confuses people the most. Others see their solitude as sadness, when in truth, it's self-respect. They don't fear loneliness because they've learned that being alone with peace is better than being with someone who drains it. They know that love, when it's real, doesn't rush. It arrives when both souls are ready to meet each other honestly. And yet, even in their patience, there's a quiet ache. They miss the warmth of connection, not the noise, but the stillness of it, the feeling of being known. Sometimes they catch glimpses of it in unexpected places, a stranger's kind eyes, a song that feels like recognition, a dream that reminds them what real love feels like. Those moments keep them believing. The old soul's love isn't soft in a fragile way. It's soft in a strong way. It doesn't chase or beg. It holds steady. It's the kind of love that doesn't demand to be noticed, but when it's found, it changes everything. So they wait not out of fear, but faith. Because deep down, they know that real love still exists. It's just rare, and maybe, just maybe, only the ones who've learned to be whole on their own ever get to find it. There comes a quiet moment when the old soul realizes they're done pretending not just with the world, but with themselves. For years, they've been performing their depth in small, subtle ways, speaking gently about things that matter, hinting at truths without fully naming them, playing the role of the deep one in conversations where people only wanted the illusion of meaning, not the real thing. They tried to meet others halfway, to make their inner world easier to digest. But now, something inside them snaps, softly, but completely. They stop performing depth for others and start simply being it. It's not a rebellion, it's a release. They no longer feel the need to dress their truth in softer words or smaller feelings. They stop forcing connections with people who only want fragments of who they are. They stop shaping themselves into something more palatable. The death of pretending doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with stillness, a kind of freedom that feels like finally taking a deep breath after years of holding it in. For the old soul, pretending once felt like survival. It helped them fit into conversations that never went anywhere, friendships built on shared distraction, relationships where honesty was too much. They learned how to mask their sensitivity, to laugh when they wanted to cry, to act light when their thoughts were oceans deep. But now, the cost has become too high. Every time they fake ease, something real in them dims. Every time they perform being okay, their soul feels unseen. So they stop. At first, it feels strange. They notice how silence fills spaces where small talk used to live. They notice who fades away when they stop performing comfort for others. Some people mistake their honesty for coldness, their calm for disinterest. But the old soul no longer explains. They've learned that truth doesn't need defending, it just needs living. They begin to show up as themselves, fully and quietly. If they're sad, they let it be. If they're inspired, they create without apology. If they're tired, they rest instead of pushing through. Life starts to feel softer, more natural. The old soul begins to see that depth was never something to prove, it was something to embody. And in that authenticity, something beautiful happens. The right people start to find them, the ones who see their stillness as strength, not distance. The ones who don't need constant explanation to feel the connection. These are the people who understand that depth doesn't always speak sometimes, it just is. The death of pretending isn't an ending, it's a rebirth. It's the moment the old soul stops acting like who the world wants them to be and starts living as who they truly are. And in that quiet, unshakable honesty, they finally feel what they've been searching for all along: peace. The kind that doesn't need to be seen to be real. the kind that just exists, like truth, waiting patiently beneath the noise. There comes a time when the old soul realizes that depth isn't found in thinking more, but in being more. For so long, they've lived in their head analyzing, understanding, searching for meaning in every shadow and whisper. They've traveled through the layers of thought, through philosophy, psychology, and spiritual wonder. But now, something shifts. They begin to understand that real depth isn't always about reaching further. Sometimes it's about returning to the present moment, to the breath, to the heartbeat, to the simplicity of just existing. It's a strange kind of awakening, the kind that feels less like learning and more like remembering. The old soul starts to notice how much of life happens in the spaces they used to overlook. The way sunlight flickers through a curtain, the warmth of a cup in their hands, the sound of their own breathing in a quiet room. These small things, once invisible, now feel holy. They realize that presence isn't something to achieve, it's what's left when the noise finally fades. For years, they thought being deep meant seeing beyond the surface. But now they see that the deepest thing of all is the surface when you're truly there for it. The world doesn't need to be escaped to feel meaningful. It only needs to be noticed. The old soul begins to slow down. They speak less, rush less, and listen more, not to respond, but to hear. They stop searching for enlightenment in distant ideas and start finding it in the feeling of wind on their skin, in laughter that feels real, in the stillness between heartbeats. At first, the simplicity feels strange. Their mind, used to running in circles, tries to complicate it, to turn presence into another task, another goal to perfect. But then, a softer knowing takes over. There's nothing to do. There's only to be. They learn to sit in the moment without trying to capture it, to breathe without analyzing the breath, to live without constantly needing to explain the meaning of life. In presence, they realize life explains itself. Something inside them softens. The constant ache to fix, to understand, to be more slowly, dissolves. The peace they were always chasing reveals itself not in distant wisdom, but right here, in the ordinary magic of now. They begin to see that stillness isn't emptiness, it's fullness. The moment is never lacking. It holds everything if you're willing to stop long enough to see it. The old soul stops running toward enlightenment and starts walking with it. Every moment becomes a teacher. Every breath becomes enough. Depth no longer means drowning in thought. It means floating in awareness. The mind quiets, the heart opens, and they finally understand the truth that had been whispering all along. Life isn't waiting to be found in the future or remembered from the past. It's happening right here, in the stillness they've finally learned to feel. After so much time feeling like they were speaking a language no one else understood, the old soul begins to notice something subtle, changing. Slowly, quietly, they start to meet others who move through the world with the same kind of softness. People who don't rush to fill silence, who listen with their eyes as much as their ears, who feel before they speak. They don't arrive all at once. These kindred spirits appear like stars in the distance, one by one, until the darkness starts to look less empty. The old soul has spent years surrounded by noise that never reached their heart, pretending to belong in places where they always felt out of rhythm. But now, when they find someone who feels like them, calm, grounded, real, There's a kind of unspoken recognition. It doesn't need words. It's like meeting someone you didn't know you missed. There's no performance, no pressure to be anything more than what already is, just presence. And that's what makes it sacred. With these few, conversations run deep, even when they're simple. A shared glance can feel like a paragraph. A quiet walk together says more than hours of talking ever could. They speak in a language made of understanding, one that doesn't require explaining every feeling, because both already know. It's not about having everything in common. It's about sensing the same depth in each other, the same ache, the same calm. These connections feel rare because they are. You can't seek them out. They find you when you're ready. The old soul realizes that when they stopped pretending, stopped chasing, stopped bending themselves to fit in, that's when the right people began to appear. The ones who aren't afraid of depth, the ones who don't confuse peace with boredom, the ones who understand that silence isn't empty but full of truth. They learn that it was never about having many connections. It was about finding the few that truly matter. The world celebrates numbers, crowds, and visibility, but the old soul has discovered a quieter kind of abundance, one that lives in the presence of just a handful of real hearts. They don't need to be surrounded anymore. They just need to be seen and to see others in return. These kindred souls don't try to fix each other. They hold space, they listen, they understand. They come without demands, without masks, without noise. Being around them feels like breathing clean air after years of smoke. With them, the old soul remembers that connection doesn't have to be heavy. It can be gentle, effortless, honest. The beauty of the few is that they restore your faith in connection itself. They remind you that depth doesn't isolate forever. It just clears space for what's real. And once you've found those few souls who speak your wordless language, the world doesn't feel so lonely anymore. It feels alive again, quieter, smaller, but infinitely more true. For most of their life, the old soul has been called distant. People have mistaken their calm for coldness, their quiet for disinterest, their space for rejection. It used to hurt being misunderstood, for simply needing to breathe differently than everyone else. They would question themselves, wondering if maybe they were too reserved, too cautious, too hard to reach. But with time, something begins to shift. They start to see that their distance was never detachment. It was discernment. The space they kept wasn't walls, it was sacred ground. The old soul feels deeply, and that's exactly why they've learned to protect their energy. They can't open themselves to everyone, because not everyone meets them with care. The world is full of noise, disguised as connection. People who speak loudly but say nothing, who take more than they give. The old soul has felt the exhaustion that comes from letting too many people too close. Now, they know better. Distance isn't absence. It's clarity. It's how they keep their light from being dimmed by constant chaos. They begin to notice how peaceful it feels to no longer explain themselves. They stop apologizing for needing space, for disappearing to recharge, for saying no when something doesn't feel right. The more they honor their boundaries, the more they realize how sacred those limits are. Boundaries aren't barriers, they're protection for what's real. They don't keep love out, they keep exhaustion out. They don't make the heart smaller, they make it stronger. Distance, they learn, doesn't mean indifference. It means perspective. When you can step back, you can see clearly who's genuine and who's pretending, what's true and what's noise. The old soul starts to understand that not everyone who wants access to them deserves it. Their energy is a living thing, and they've learned to treat it like one. They no longer hand it out freely in hopes of being liked. They offer it where it's met with respect. Some people still won't understand. They'll call the old soul hard to read, too private, unemotional. But that's because the world confuses openness with oversharing and connection with constant availability. The old soul doesn't operate that way. They know that silence can speak louder than words, and that true closeness doesn't require constant contact, just trust, presence, and peace. As they grow more comfortable in their quiet, the old soul realizes that distance has always been their wisdom in disguise. It's what kept them from losing themselves in the noise of others. It's what taught them that love doesn't have to be all-consuming to be real. It's what allowed them to stay aligned with truth when the world kept trying to pull them away from it. In the end, the old soul's distance isn't a cold retreat from life. It's a choice to live it consciously, to stay close to what matters and far from what drains. To keep sacred what the world has forgotten how to value: stillness, space, and the quiet strength of knowing exactly who they are. There comes a moment when the loneliness that once felt heavy begins to shift. It doesn't disappear. Not exactly, it transforms. The old soul, who once felt isolated in their silence, starts to sense something stirring beneath it. The quiet that used to ache now begins to glow. It's as if, in the heart of their solitude, a light slowly flickers to life, and they realize what they were searching for in others was never missing. It was waiting inside them all along. At first, solitude had felt like emptiness. The world had taught them that being alone meant being unloved, unseen, unwanted. But when they stopped fighting the silence, when they finally sat with it instead of trying to escape it, they discovered that it wasn't empty at all. It was full of awareness, full of presence, full of something deep and sacred. The loneliness that once frightened them became a doorway. On the other side wasn't despair. It was connection not to people, but to the soul itself. In that quiet space, the old soul begins to feel their own essence more clearly. They can hear their intuition without the echo of others' opinions. They can feel their emotions without absorbing the world's chaos. They can finally tell the difference between what's truly theirs and what never was. The more they sit in this stillness, the more they realize that they were never disconnected or just distracted. Beneath all the noise, the soul had always been there, patient and steady, waiting to be remembered. They start to see that loneliness isn't a punishment, it's an initiation. It strips away everything false until only truth remains. Without constant company, they begin to reconnect to their creativity, to their sense of wonder, to the small joys they'd overlooked. The morning light through a window, the rhythm of their own breath, the feeling of being alive in a body that still hopes, still dreams. There's beauty in that simplicity, a quiet kind of wholeness that doesn't depend on anyone else to complete it. The old soul learns that connection isn't always found in conversation or company. Sometimes it's found in silence, in the space where the mind softens and the heart opens. It's found in the moments when you stop searching for meaning and start feeling it instead. In those moments, they don't feel separate from the world anymore. They feel part of it. The trees, the air, the stars, the pulse of something eternal. The light within the loneliness becomes their guide. It doesn't erase their need for others, but it changes it. They no longer seek connection from emptiness, but from fullness. They can love freely now, without losing themselves in the process. They can walk alone without feeling lost. And when they look back on all the years they thought they were lonely, they finally understand they weren't abandoned by the world. They were being led back to themselves, to the quiet, steady light that had been burning within them all along.